Take your time, I told my wife as she left for another fake conference. There's nothing left here for you anyway. She didn't hear the warning in my voice, but she should have. Because while she was playing games, I was playing chess. And I was already 3 moves ahead. My name is Shane Whitman. I'm 47 years old, and I've been married to Bridget for 19 years. We've got 3 kids. James is 18 and heading to college in the fall. Riley just turned 13 and thinks they know everything. And little Owen is 2 years old. Owen wasn't exactly planned, but I wanted another child so badly that I convinced Bridget to try one more time. She was hesitant at 43, but she agreed. Now I wonder if that decision started the whole thing falling apart. I work as an IT specialist for a mid-sized insurance company in Denver. It's steady work, pays well enough to keep us comfortable in our suburban home with a white picket fence and everything. Bridget works part-time as a dental hygienist, which gives her flexibility with the kids. Or at least, that's what I thought she was doing with her free time. The first red flag should have been Francis Montgomery. Frank, as we all called him, had been my buddy since college. He was my best man at our wedding, Owen's godfather, and someone I trusted completely. Frank runs a computer repair shop downtown, and we'd often collaborate on bigger projects. Our families did barbecues together, went on camping trips, celebrated holidays. He was practically family. But about 6 months ago, things started feeling different. Bridget began working more hours, taking on special projects that required her to stay late. She'd come home smelling like expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine. Her phone, which used to sit casually on the kitchen counter, suddenly lived face down and never left her side. The kids noticed too. James started asking me why Mom was always on her phone during dinner. Riley complained that Bridget seemed distracted when helping with homework. Even little Owen would toddle over to me instead of her when he needed comfort, like he could sense something was off. I tried talking to Bridget about it, but she brushed off my concerns. She said I was being paranoid, that work was just stressful, that I should focus on my own responsibilities instead of imagining problems. The way she said it made me feel like I was losing my mind, like maybe I really was overthinking everything. But a man knows when something's wrong in his own house. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March. I was working late in my home office, debugging a network issue for a client, when I heard Bridget's phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. She was upstairs giving Owen a bath, and the sound was driving me crazy. After the 5th buzz, I walked over to silence it. That's when I saw the notification preview on her lock screen. A message from Frank M. that read, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Same place as usual." My blood turned to ice. Same place as usual? What place? And why was my best friend making plans with my wife that I didn't know about? I stood there staring at that phone like it might explode. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't tell if it was from anger or fear. Frank and Bridget had always been friendly, sure, but this felt different. This felt secretive. "Shane, did you hear Owen crying?" Bridget called from upstairs. "Yeah, honey, just checking something," I replied, my voice somehow steady despite the storm in my chest. I went back to my office, but I couldn't concentrate on work anymore. Every click of the keyboard felt mechanical, meaningless. My mind was racing through every interaction I'd witnessed between Frank and Bridget over the past few months. The way she'd light up when he came over for barbecues. How she'd always volunteer to grab him a beer or ask about his business. The lingering hugs that lasted just a second too long. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, I tried to bring it up casually with Bridget. "So, Frank texted you earlier," I said, watching her face carefully. She didn't even look up from her book. "Oh yeah? What about?" "Something about meeting tomorrow." Now she looked at me, and I caught something in her eyes. Not guilt exactly, but calculation. Like she was deciding how much to tell me. "He's having trouble with his business software," Bridget said smoothly. "I offered to help him figure it out, since you've been so busy with that new client." It sounded reasonable. It even made sense. Frank wasn't the most tech-savvy guy, and Bridget had picked up some computer skills over the years. But something about her tone felt rehearsed, like she'd been preparing this explanation. "Why didn't he just ask me?" I pressed. "You know how proud he is," she replied, turning back to her book. "He probably doesn't want to admit he needs help with something computer-related from his IT expert friend." Again, perfectly logical. Frank was proud, and he might prefer asking Bridget for a favor that seemed smaller, less professional. But my gut was screaming that something was wrong. That night, I lay awake listening to Bridget breathe beside me, wondering when I'd started questioning every word that came out of her mouth. I've always been good with technology, but I never thought I'd use those skills to investigate my own wife. The next morning, after Bridget left for what she claimed was a dental conference, I did something that went against every principle I'd held about trust and privacy in marriage. I checked our shared cloud storage. Bridget had been backing up her phone photos automatically for years, never bothering to change the settings. Most of it was innocent, pictures of the kids, family events, random shots of food or sunsets. But then I found a folder labeled Work Projects that I'd never noticed before. My hands were trembling as I clicked on it. Inside were photos that made my world collapse. Bridget and Frank at restaurants I'd never been to, holding hands across candlelit tables. Frank's arm around her waist in what looked like a hotel lobby. And one that nearly made me sick, Bridget wearing the black dress I bought her for our anniversary last year. The one she claimed didn't fit anymore, standing close to Frank in what was clearly a hotel room. The timestamps told the whole story. These photos went back 4 months. 4 months of lies, of late meetings and work conferences. 4 months of my best friend betraying me while I covered for him at family gatherings. James walked into my office just as I was staring at the screen. "Dad, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost," my 18-year-old son said, concern clear in his voice. I quickly closed the laptop, but James is sharp. He's always been observant, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. "James, sit down," I said, making a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. "We need to talk." "Is this about Mom and Uncle Frank?" he asked quietly. My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" James looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with his phone. "I saw them last week at the mall. They were holding hands and, Dad, they were kissing. I didn't know what to do, so I just left." The rage that hit me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. Not just at Bridget and Frank, but at myself for being so blind. My own son had been carrying this burden, probably wondering if he should tell me, while I stumbled around in ignorance. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, trying to keep my voice gentle. "I hoped I was wrong," James said, his voice breaking slightly. "I thought maybe there was some explanation. Uncle Frank has been like family my whole life." I pulled my son into a hug, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was about protecting my children from the fallout of their mother's choices. "We're going to handle this," I told James firmly. "But I need you to trust me and let me do it my way." The next 2 weeks were the hardest of my life. I had to act normal around Bridget while knowing exactly what she was doing behind my back. I smiled at family dinners, helped Owen with his bedtime routine, and made small talk about our days, all while evidence of her betrayal burned in my mind. But I wasn't passive. I was planning. During my lunch breaks, I met with a divorce attorney my mother had recommended. Dorothy Whitman might be 72, but she's nobody's fool. When I finally told her what was happening, she didn't waste time with sympathy or shock. "You need to protect yourself and those children," she said firmly. "Document everything, secure your finances, and don't let emotion cloud your judgment." My mother's practical wisdom kept me grounded. She helped me transfer assets, change passwords, and prepare for the legal battle ahead. Having her support meant everything. She'd raised me to be strong, and now she was making sure I stayed that way. I also started gathering more evidence. Bridget had grown careless, probably thinking I was too trusting or too busy to notice. Her text messages became bolder, her absences longer. She even started taking contraceptive pills again, which I discovered when Owen knocked over her purse in the kitchen. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd been taking birth control while we were supposedly trying for another baby, something she'd hinted at just last month. On a Thursday evening, Bridget announced she'd be going to another conference the next day. "I won't be long," she said casually, touching up her makeup in the hallway mirror. "Just an overnight thing in Colorado Springs." I knew exactly where she was really going. Frank had posted on social media about a weekend getaway at a mountain resort, then quickly deleted it. But I'd already taken screenshots. "Take your time," I replied, my voice steady and calm. "Actually, take all the time you need. There's nothing left here for you anyway." She paused, lipstick halfway to her mouth, and looked at me strangely. "What did you say?" I said, "Take your time," I repeated, meeting her eyes in the mirror. No rush coming back. Something flickered across her face. Confusion, maybe suspicion, but she shrugged it off. Okay, weird way to put it, but thanks for being understanding, she said, grabbing her overnight bag. After she left, I called James and Riley into the living room. Owen was already asleep upstairs. Kids, we need to talk about what's going to happen this weekend, I began. It was time to stop being the victim and start being the man my family needed me to be. Bridget might think she was playing games, but she had no idea that I'd already won. Saturday morning arrived like Judgment Day. I'd spent the night finalizing my preparations, transferring the last of our joint assets into accounts Bridget couldn't access, and making copies of every document that mattered. My mother had taken Owen for the weekend, claiming she wanted some grandma time. Riley was staying at a friend's house. Only James remained, and he'd insisted on being here for whatever came next. You sure you want to see this through, son? I asked him as we waited in the living room. James nodded firmly. She's been lying to all of us, Dad. Someone needs to call her out. At 2:30 p.m., Bridget's car pulled into the driveway. Through the window, I watched her check her appearance in the rearview mirror, fixing her hair and reapplying lipstick. She looked satisfied, glowing even. The sight made my stomach turn. She walked in carrying her overnight bag, humming softly to herself. Hey guys, she said cheerfully. Sorry I'm a bit late. The conference ran longer than expected. I bet it did, James muttered under his breath. Bridget shot him a sharp look. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, Mom, James replied, but his tone was ice cold. I stood up from the couch, holding the manila envelope I'd prepared. Bridget, we need to talk. Something in my voice must have warned her, because her cheerful expression faltered. About what? She asked, setting down her bag. About your conference, I said, opening the envelope and pulling out the printed photos. Or should I say, your romantic getaway with Frank. The color drained from her face as I laid the pictures on the coffee table one by one. Bridget and Frank at restaurants. Bridget and Frank holding hands. Bridget wearing my anniversary gift while embracing another man. Shane, I can explain, she began, but her voice was shaking. Can you? I asked, my voice steady despite the fury coursing through my veins. Can you explain why you've been lying to me for months? Can you explain why you've been using money from our children's college fund to finance your affair? You went through our accounts? She asked, indignation creeping into her voice. I'm an IT specialist, Bridget. I went through everything. Your texts, your emails, your cloud storage. Did you really think you could hide this from me forever? James stood up beside me, his young face hard with anger. Mom, how could you do this to our family? Frank was supposed to be our friend. Bridget's eyes darted between us, and I could see her calculating, trying to find some way to minimize the damage. It wasn't supposed to happen, she said finally. It just developed naturally. Frank understands me in ways that... Stop, I interrupted firmly. Don't you dare try to justify this by blaming me. You made a choice. You chose to betray your husband, your children, and your marriage vows. Shane, please, she pleaded. We can work through this. It was a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment. I pulled out another document from the envelope. A 4-month mistake? Because that's how long this has been going on, according to these photos. Her face crumpled as she realized how thoroughly I'd documented her betrayal. Bridget sank into the armchair, her confident facade completely shattered. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her exposed lies. How did you find out? She asked quietly. Does it matter? I replied. The point is, it's over. All of it. James crossed his arms, looking every inch the man he was becoming. Mom, Dad's been planning this for weeks. Did you really think we were that stupid? James, please, Bridget said, reaching toward our son. You don't understand. Your father and I have been growing apart for years. I was lonely, and Frank was there for me. Frank was there for you. I laughed bitterly. Frank was my best friend. He was Owen's godfather. He ate at our table, played with our children, and all the while he was planning to destroy our family. It wasn't like that, Bridget protested weakly. I pulled out my phone and played a voice message I'd saved from her cloud backup. Her own voice filled the room, speaking to Frank in intimate tones that she hadn't used with me in years. This is from last Tuesday, I said as the message ended. While I was working late to provide for this family, you were telling another man how much you loved him. Bridget began to cry, but they were tears of self-pity rather than genuine remorse. What happens now? She asked through her sobs. I handed her another set of papers from the envelope. Divorce papers. Already filed. My attorney says we can keep this simple and quiet, or we can make it public and messy. Your choice. You can't do this, she said, anger flashing in her eyes. I have rights. Those are my children too. Yes, they are, I agreed. Which is why I'm offering you a deal. You agree to joint custody with me having primary residence. You don't fight the financial terms I've outlined, and I won't send copies of all this evidence to your employer, your mother, or Frank's wife. Bridget's eyes widened. You wouldn't. James stepped forward, his voice cold and determined. Dad's being generous, Mom. If it were up to me, everyone would know what kind of person you really are. Your son is right, I said firmly. I'm giving you a chance to preserve what little dignity you have left. But if you try to fight me on this, if you try to take my children away or drag this through the courts, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what happened here. Bridget looked back and forth between James and me, finally understanding that she had no allies left in this room. Where am I supposed to go? She asked. That's not my problem anymore, I replied. You can figure that out with Frank. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to help you start your new life together. I walked to the front door and opened it, the afternoon sunlight streaming into our home. Your bags are packed and waiting upstairs, I told her. Take what's yours and leave the rest. The locks will be changed by tomorrow morning. Bridget stood slowly, defeat written across her face. As she headed for the stairs, she turned back one last time. Shane, I'm sorry. I really am. So am I replied honestly. I'm sorry I wasted 19 years loving someone who was capable of this. James put his hand on my shoulder as we watched her disappear upstairs. You did the right thing, Dad, he said quietly. I know, son. I know. The silence in the room was deafening after Bridget left. James and I sat there processing what had just happened, the weight of 19 years of marriage ending in a single afternoon. But I wasn't done yet. There were still loose ends to tie up, and Frank Montgomery needed to face the consequences of his betrayal. Dad, what's our next move? James asked, his voice steady despite everything we'd been through. We make sure Frank understands that actions have consequences, I replied, pulling out my phone. I scrolled to Frank's contact and hit call. It rang 3 times before he answered. Shane? Hey buddy, what's up? Frank's voice was casual, friendly even. The same tone he'd used when lying to my face for months. We need to talk, Frank. Face to face. Tonight. There was a pause. Is everything okay? You sound different. Meet me at Murphy's bar in an hour, I said firmly. Come alone. Shane, what's this about? You know exactly what it's about, I replied and hung up. James looked at me with concern. Dad, are you sure about this? What if he gets violent? I appreciated my son's worry, but I'd thought this through. Frank's a coward, son. He's been sneaking around behind my back for months instead of being man enough to face me directly. He won't try anything in a public place. An hour later, I walked into Murphy's bar and found Frank sitting in a corner booth, nervously nursing a beer. When he saw me approaching, the guilty look on his face told me everything I needed to know. Shane, he started, standing up awkwardly. Look, I think there's been some misunderstanding. Sit down, Frank, I said quietly, sliding into the booth across from him. And don't insult my intelligence with lies. Frank's shoulders sagged, and for the first time, he looked like the pathetic man he really was. How long have you known? He asked. Long enough, I replied. The real question is how you thought you could destroy my family and get away with it. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, Frank said, echoing Bridget's earlier words. Bridget was unhappy, and we just connected. So you decided to betray 20 years of friendship? I asked, keeping my voice level. You decided to become a homewrecker? Frank flinched at the word. Shane, you have to understand. No, I interrupted firmly. You understand this. I've got enough evidence to destroy both of you. Photos, financial records, text messages. I could ruin your business, your reputation, everything. Frank's face went pale. What do you want? I want you to disappear, I said simply. Close your shop, leave Denver, and never contact any member of my family again. If I see you near my children, if you try to interfere with the divorce proceedings, or if you ever try to come back into our lives, I'll make sure everyone in this city knows exactly what kind of man you are. Shane, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I cut him off. Because if I were being emotional, we'd be having this conversation in an alley instead of a bar. Frank stared at me for a long moment, finally seeing the man I'd become instead of the pushover he thought he could manipulate. "And Bridget?" he asked quietly. "That's between you and her now," I said, standing up. "But Frank, she betrayed her husband and children for you. What makes you think she won't do the same thing to you when someone more interesting comes along?" I left him sitting there with that thought, knowing I'd never have to see his face again. 2 weeks after the confrontation, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Frank had indeed closed his computer repair shop and left town, though rumors suggested he and Bridget had moved to Seattle together. I didn't care enough to confirm it. The divorce proceedings moved smoothly, largely because Bridget didn't want the evidence I'd gathered to become public. She agreed to joint custody with me having primary residence, and the financial settlement was fair. My attorney had been impressed with how thoroughly I'd documented everything. "Most men don't think to protect themselves this way," he told me. "You save yourself months of legal battles and thousands in attorney fees." My mother had been invaluable throughout the process. Dorothy Whitman had coordinated everything from babysitting Owen during legal meetings to helping me set up the house for single parenthood. "You raised me right, Mom," I told her one evening as we finished dinner. "I don't know how I would have handled this without your support." "You handled it like a man," she replied firmly. "You protected your children and stood up for yourself. That's what counts." James had stepped up in ways that amazed me. He'd taken on more responsibility with Owen and Riley, helping with homework and making sure everyone felt secure despite the upheaval. Watching him mature into the kind of man I'd hoped to raise filled me with pride. "Dad, I've been thinking about college," James said one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. "What about it?" "I want to stay local for at least the first year," he explained. "Help you get settled with Owen and Riley before I go off on my own." "Son, you don't need to sacrifice your future for us," I said, touched by his consideration. "It's not a sacrifice," James replied. "It's family. Besides, Colorado State has a good engineering program, and I'd rather be here while everyone adjusts to the new normal." Riley had been quieter than usual, but they seemed to be processing everything in their own way. They'd started spending more time with my mother, learning cooking and hearing stories about her family history. "Grandma Dorothy says you were stubborn even as a little boy," Riley told me one afternoon, grinning for the first time in weeks. "Your grandmother has a lot of opinions," I replied, ruffling their hair. "Most of them right, unfortunately." Owen, being only 2, had adapted quickest of all. He seemed to sense that something had changed, but as long as his routine stayed consistent and his family was there for him, he remained his cheerful, energetic self. The house felt different now, quieter in some ways, but more honest. There were no more lies hanging in the air, no more pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. We were building something new, something real. I'd even started dating again, though I was taking it very slowly. A woman named Carol from Owen's daycare had asked me for coffee, and I'd surprised myself by saying yes. Nothing serious yet, but it felt good to remember that my life wasn't over at 47. "The kids seem happy," Carol observed during our second coffee date. "That says a lot about the kind of father you are." "They're resilient," I replied, stronger than I gave them credit for. As I tucked Owen into bed that night, he wrapped his little arms around my neck and said, "Daddy, stay." "I'm not going anywhere, buddy," I promised him. "Daddy's staying right here." And for the first time in months, I meant it completely. 6 months later, our lives had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The divorce was finalized, Bridget was officially out of our lives, and we'd established a new normal that actually felt better than what we'd had before. James had started at Colorado State University, but was living at home, which turned out to be perfect. He'd grown into an incredible young man, taking on responsibilities around the house and serving as a role model for his younger siblings. His presence gave me the confidence to start exploring new opportunities. "Dad, there's something I want to talk to you about," James said one Saturday morning as we worked together in the garage, organizing tools. "What's on your mind, son?" "I've been thinking about Mom's request to see Owen and Riley more often," he said carefully. Bridget had been making overtures through her attorney about increased visitation. She and Frank had apparently settled in Seattle, where she'd found work at a dental practice and he'd started another computer repair business. "What do you think about it?" I asked, genuinely curious about James's perspective. "I think Owen deserves to know his mother, even if she made terrible choices," James said thoughtfully. But Riley should get to decide for themselves. And any visit should happen here, on our terms, not in Seattle where we can't supervise. I was impressed by his maturity and wisdom. That's very reasonable thinking. Besides, James added with a slight grin, I kind of want her to see how well we're all doing without her drama. Riley had indeed flourished since the divorce. They'd started taking art classes with my mother, discovered a talent for painting, and seemed more confident and outgoing than they'd ever been during the tension-filled final months of my marriage. I don't really miss Mom, Riley had confided in me recently. I miss the idea of having a mom, but not her specifically. Does that make sense? It made perfect sense. Riley had learned to distinguish between wanting a fantasy and accepting reality. Owen had adapted beautifully to our new family structure. At 2.5, he was speaking in full sentences and had developed a special bond with my mother, who doted on him shamelessly. Daddy, Grandma Dorothy says I'm the smartest boy in the whole world, Owen announced one evening at dinner. Grandma Dorothy might be a little biased, I replied, winking at my mother. A little. James laughed. She thinks Owen invented walking. The biggest surprise had been my relationship with Carol. What started as casual coffee dates had evolved into something deeper and more meaningful. She was divorced herself, with 2 teenage daughters, and understood the complexities of blended families. I love how your children respect you, she told me one evening as we watched Owen and Riley play in a backyard while James worked on homework at the kitchen table. It's clear they feel secure and loved. They're my priority, I replied simply. I know. That's one of the things I admire about you. Carol had met my mother's approval, which was no small feat. Dorothy Whitman was protective of her grandchildren and skeptical of any woman who might disrupt our hard-won stability. She's not trying to replace anyone or rush into anything, my mother had observed after Carol's 3rd visit to our house. She respects what you've built here. As I tucked Owen into bed that night, he looked up at me with those serious little eyes that reminded me so much of James at that age. Daddy, are we happy now? He asked. Yes, buddy, we're happy now, I assured him. Are you happy? Very happy, Owen said, snuggling deeper into his covers. I like our family just how it is. So did I. We'd survived the storm and built something stronger in its aftermath. 1 year after the divorce was finalized, I received an unexpected phone call from Frank Montgomery. I almost didn't answer when I saw his name on my caller ID, but curiosity got the better of me. Shane, it's Frank. Please don't hang up. You've got 30 seconds, I said coldly. Bridget left me, he said without preamble. She met someone at her new job and took off with him last week, cleaned out our joint account, and disappeared. I felt no satisfaction in his pain, but I also felt no sympathy. And you're telling me this because you tried to warn me, and I should have listened. You said she'd do the same thing to me that she did to you. Frank, I don't care about your relationship problems. You made your choice when you decided to destroy my family. I know I screwed up everything. But Shane, I miss my friendship with you and the kids. I miss being Uncle Frank. The audacity of his request left me speechless for a moment. Frank, let me be very clear about something, I said finally. You were never really Uncle Frank. You were a man who pretended to care about my family while planning to steal my wife. The person we thought we knew never actually existed. Shane, please. No, I interrupted firmly. You don't get to come back. You don't get to miss what you deliberately destroyed. Find a way to live with your choices, but do it far away from my family. I hung up and immediately blocked his number. James, who'd overheard the conversation, looked at me with approval. Good for you, Dad. Some bridges are meant to stay burned. That afternoon, I was working in my home office when Carol arrived for Sunday dinner with her daughters, Emma and Sophie. The girls had become like extended family to us, and Riley particularly enjoyed having older female influences around. How was everyone's week? Carol asked as we gathered around the dinner table that my mother had insisted on expanding to accommodate our growing household. I got accepted to the summer engineering program at CSU. James announced proudly. That's wonderful, sweetheart, Carol said, and I noticed she'd naturally started using endearments with my children. And I sold one of my paintings at the art show, Riley added excitedly. You're all so accomplished, Emma, Carol's older daughter, said admiringly. It's like a family of overachievers. We just support each other, I explained. When everyone in the family is rooting for your success, it's easier to achieve it. Later that evening, As we cleaned up after dinner, Carol pulled me aside. "Shane, I've been thinking about something," she said, looking slightly nervous. "What's that?" "Emma's graduating next year, and Sophie will be a senior. My lease is up in 3 months. She paused, studying my face. "I was wondering how you'd feel about us taking the next step. Moving in together, I mean." I looked around at our home, seeing how naturally Carol and her daughters had integrated into our family dynamic. Owen adored them. Riley looked up to Emma and Sophie, and James had become like a protective older brother to both girls. "I think," I said carefully, "that would depend on whether you're ready to take on a man with 3 kids and a very opinionated mother." Carol laughed. "Your mother and I get along great, and your kids are amazing. The question is whether you're ready to take on a woman with 2 teenage daughters and a lot of emotional baggage from her own divorce." "I think we're all a little damaged," I replied, pulling her closer. "But maybe that makes us appreciate what we have here even more." 6 months later, we were engaged. The wedding was small and intimate, held in our backyard with both families present. My mother walked me down the makeshift aisle. Emma and Sophie served as bridesmaids alongside Riley, and James stood as my best man. As I looked out at our assembled family, biological, adopted, and chosen, I realized that Bridget's betrayal had actually led me to something better than I'd ever imagined possible. Owen, now 3 and serving as ring bearer, announced loudly during the ceremony, "Now Carol is our mama too." Everyone laughed, and Carol wiped away tears as she knelt down to hug him. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well.